He was 44 years old, sitting in a wheelchair at the edge of his own living room, watching his wife laugh at a joke he wasn't part of. The penthouse smelled like her perfume and someone else's cologne. Derek Coltrane hadn't said a word in 20 minutes. He didn't need to. He was watching. He had been watching for a long time. And on the night his wife grabbed a microphone in front of 200 guests and announced she was done with him. Done with the broken man in the chair, done pretending. She made one catastrophic mistake. She assumed he was still broken. She was wrong. Before we go any further, if this is your first time on this channel, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We've got people tuning in from Texas, from Ohio, from Georgia, from California, and every single one of you keeps this channel alive. Now let's get into this story, because what Derek did next is something you are not going to forget. Derek Coltrane had built his life the hard way. Born in Gary, Indiana, to a father who worked the overnight shift at a steel plant and a mother who cleaned offices downtown, Derek understood from a young age that money didn't come to you. You went to it. He put himself through community college, transferred to DePaul University on academic merit, and by the time he was 32, he had founded Coltrane Property Group, a boutique luxury real estate firm operating out of Chicago's Gold Coast. He was sharp, disciplined, and obsessively detail-oriented. His business partner, a man named Raymond, often said that Derek saw 5 moves ahead in every deal. He wasn't just selling properties. He was building a legacy. And for a while, it felt like the life he'd worked for was finally solidly his. He met Sophia at a charity gala in the fall of 2016. She was 31, elegant, working in event planning for a high-end hospitality group. She had dark hair and a way of standing in a room that made people notice her. Derek noticed her, and for the first 2 years, their life together was genuinely good. Not perfect, no life is, but good. They married in a small ceremony in Savannah, Georgia, in the spring of 2018. Raymond was the best man. Sophia's sister, Camille, cried during the vows. And Derek, who almost never let his emotions show, smiled in a way that people who knew him said they had never seen before. He looked free. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman standing across from him was already calculating what his freedom was worth. The accident happened on a Tuesday in March of 2022. A commercial truck ran a red light on West Madison Street and hit Derek's car on the driver's side at nearly 50 miles per hour. He was conscious when the paramedics arrived. He kept asking about his briefcase. That detail, the briefcase, would haunt his physical therapist later, because it said everything about how Derek's mind worked even in crisis. He was thinking about the deal. He was always thinking about the deal. The damage to his spinal cord was severe. After 3 surgeries and 6 weeks in the ICU, the doctors told him that he had sustained a T10 incomplete spinal cord injury. He had sensation in parts of his legs but no functional movement. For now, and possibly permanently, he was confined to a wheelchair. Derek Coltrane, the man who had never been still a day in his life, was suddenly completely still. The months that followed were the darkest of his life. He came home to the penthouse on North Lake Shore Drive, and the world he had known felt like it belonged to someone else. Raymond handled the firm while Derek recovered, sending reports and updates that Derek would read and reread because reading felt like the only thing left that still made sense. And Sophia was there. In the beginning, she played the part well. She arranged the medical equipment. She hired nursing staff. She attended the doctor's appointments. She posted a photo on social media of herself holding Derek's hand in the hospital, and the caption said, "Through everything. Always." It got 4,000 likes. She saved that number. She checked it more than once. But behind the performance, something colder was already in motion. Derek couldn't see it at first. He was in too much pain, not just physically, but the particular kind of pain that comes from losing the version of yourself you worked your whole life to build. He had days where he didn't speak. Days where he sat at the floor-to-ceiling windows and stared at the lake until the light changed. Sophia would walk through the room on those days and not say anything. She wouldn't ask if he needed something. She wouldn't sit beside him. She would just keep moving like he was furniture, like he was already gone. It was Raymond who first noticed the shift in the accounts. He called Derek one evening in September of 2022, about 6 months after the accident. He kept his voice careful, the way you do when you're about to say something that will change everything. "Derek," he said, "I need you to look at the personal account statements, not the business accounts, the personal ones." Derek looked. The numbers didn't make sense at first. Then they did. Over the course of those 6 months, nearly $300,000 had moved in small, deliberate increments. Interior renovations, travel expenses, clothing purchases, a wire transfer to a private account in a name he didn't recognize. The transfers were structured carefully, always just below the threshold that would trigger automatic bank alerts. Whoever was doing it knew exactly what they were doing. Derek sat with that knowledge for a long time that night. He didn't call Sophia in. He didn't confront her. He just sat in the dark and thought. And somewhere in that silence, something in him shifted. Not toward anger, toward strategy. What Sophia didn't know, what she had never taken the time to understand, was that Derek's injury had not touched his mind. If anything, the stillness had sharpened it. He had spent months reading, studying, going through every financial record of the firm and their personal holdings. He had discovered, in that time, that the wire transfer that Raymond flagged had gone to an account registered to a man named Victor Hale, a hospitality consultant Sophia had introduced to their circle almost a year before the accident. Derek had met Victor exactly twice. He was tall, smooth, the kind of man who laughed at his own stories. Derek had thought nothing of him. He thought something of him now. He called Raymond the next morning and told him 2 things. First, don't tell anyone. Second, find me the best forensic accountant in Chicago who doesn't owe anyone a favor. Raymond, who had known Derek for 12 years, didn't ask any questions. He just said, "Give me 2 days." That was the beginning. It was also around this time that the home care arrangements changed. The nursing agency sent a new aide, listed simply on the paperwork as Michelle Carter, certified home health professional with a background in post-acute rehabilitation. She was 41, quiet, and entirely unremarkable in the way that genuinely capable people sometimes are. She wore scrubs, arrived on time, and did not make small talk. Sophia barely glanced at her on the first day. This would be one of several things Sophia would later wish she had paid more attention to. Because Michelle Carter was not exactly who her paperwork said she was. Not dishonestly, every credential she held was real. But her background went further than the nursing agency's standard summary had listed. Before transitioning into private care, Michelle had spent 8 years as a lead rehabilitation specialist at a spinal cord injury recovery center in Pittsburgh, one of the top 3 programs in the country. She had helped patients with injuries far more severe than Derek's regain function that their initial doctors had told them was impossible. She had moved to Chicago 18 months ago for personal reasons she didn't discuss, and she had taken the agency position as a quiet step back from the intensity of the clinical world. The moment she reviewed Derek's medical file and saw the imaging reports, something changed in her assessment. His injury was classified as incomplete. That word, incomplete, meant something specific in her world. It meant there was a pathway. It meant that with the right work, the right pressure applied in the right sequence, over enough time the body might respond. She didn't say this to Derek on the first day, or the second. She observed him first, the way he carried himself, the way he masked the pain, the precision of his speech. On the 5th day, after Sophia had left for what she described as a planning consultation, and what the building's doorman would later describe as the 3rd time that week the same car had picked her up, Michelle closed the therapy room door and said very plainly, "Your chart says incomplete T10. I need you to be honest with me. What can you feel?" What followed over the next 4 months was not the montage version of recovery you see in films. It was quiet and brutal and deeply unglamorous. Michelle worked Derek through a progressive neuromuscular stimulation protocol, combined with resistance training, hydrotherapy in the building's pool at 6 in the morning before the building's common areas opened, and a specific sequencing of bodyweight movements designed to trigger motor pathway reconnection. Derek threw up twice in the first week. He had days where the nerve pain was so severe that they had to stop entirely and just sit in the room, Michelle taking notes, Derek staring at the wall and breathing. But he never quit. That was the thing about Derek Coltrane that Sophia had somehow completely failed to understand. He was not a man who stopped. He had been stopped by steel and physics and the cruelty of a Tuesday morning. But stopped was not the same as done. Meanwhile, Sophia moved through their life with increasing visibility and decreasing caution. She redecorated the penthouse's 2nd bedroom. She took a trip to Miami that she told Derek was a work event. She laughed louder on her phone calls and stopped lowering her voice when she was near his room. One evening, Derek heard her say, clearly, through a wall that she apparently no longer considered worth speaking quietly near, "He's not going to do anything, Marcus. He can't even get to the car by himself." She was talking to someone named Marcus, not Victor. Marcus. Derek filed the name. He would later discover that Victor Hale and Marcus Britton were both part of Sophia's life in different capacities. Victor was the financial arrangement. Marcus was the personal one. Sophia was nothing if not organized. Raymond, during this period, was working methodically alongside a forensic accountant named Carol Huang, who had 20 years of experience untangling marital financial fraud, and who looked at Derek's account history with the quiet intensity of someone who had seen this exact pattern before. By November, Carol had documented transfers totaling $987,000. Some from Derek's personal savings, some from a joint investment account that Sophia had access to under terms they had established during better times, some from an equity line on a property in Oak Park that Derek owned before the marriage. The paper trail was extensive. Carol said it would hold up. Raymond relayed this information to Derek on a call where neither of them said very much at the end. There wasn't much to say. The number was nearly $1 million. That wasn't rage territory anymore. That was law territory. Derek contacted an attorney named Sandra Voss, a family law specialist based in downtown Chicago who had a reputation for being extraordinarily prepared and completely without sentiment. She reviewed Carol's documentation over the course of a week and told Derek in their second meeting, "We have enough to move on this. The question is when." Derek told her he needed 6 more weeks. She looked at him, at the wheelchair, at the stillness of his face, and said, "What happens in 6 weeks?" Derek said, "Her birthday." Sandra Voss was not the kind of attorney who let emotion into the room, but something shifted in her expression just slightly. She said, "All right, 6 weeks." And that was that. Sophia turned 42 on the 14th of December. She had organized her own birthday party, which was on brand for her. A catered event at the penthouse, 200 guests from their social and professional circle, a jazz quartet, an open bar, a custom dessert table. She had invited people that Derek had built relationships with over 15 years of business. She had invited Raymond, who accepted and said nothing to Sophia about what he knew. She had invited Camille, her own sister, who came because she loved Sophia in the complicated way that family love sometimes requires you to show up for people you're not entirely certain about. And she had invited Victor Hale, who stood near the window with a drink and a posture that suggested he believed himself to be anonymous in a room full of people who mostly knew his name by now. Marcus Britton was also there. Sophia had introduced him as a colleague. Derek attended his own party in his wheelchair. He wore a dark suit, no tie. He positioned himself near the edge of the main room, close enough to observe, far enough from the center that people could choose whether to engage with him or not. Most chose not to. There is a specific discomfort that healthy people feel around someone who has been reduced in ways they can see, and the guests at Sophia's birthday party demonstrated it perfectly. The too long eye contact followed by the quick look away, the overly warm greeting that lasted exactly 4 seconds before the person found somewhere else to be. Derek watched all of it. He also watched Michelle, who was present in a supporting capacity, stationed near the hallway to the east wing. They had not told anyone what the last 4 months had contained. That was deliberate. The less Sophia knew about who Michelle actually was, the longer the advantage held. At 9:47 in the evening, Sophia took the microphone from the jazz quartet's vocalist. The room quieted out of the social reflex that crowds have when someone with enough confidence commands attention. She looked beautiful. She had planned to look beautiful. Her dress was something she had bought in Miami. She gave a short, gracious speech about gratitude and growth and the people in her life who had shaped her. Then she paused. And in that pause, something changed in her face. The performance thinned out, and what came through underneath was something colder. She said, "I also want to take a moment to be honest, because I think honesty is the only currency that matters." The room shifted. Nobody moved, but everyone leaned forward, the way you do when you sense that something real is about to happen. She looked in Derek's direction. She said, "Derek and I have been through a very difficult 2 years, and I've carried a lot of that difficulty alone." She said this with a voice full of gentle sorrow, the way someone performs grief in front of an audience. "I've made the decision, and it's a decision I've made with a great deal of reflection, to move forward on my own." She smiled, the way people smile when they've decided the pain they're causing is justified. "I hope everyone here can respect that." She lowered the microphone, and the room, stunned, confused, uncertain, began to murmur. Someone near the bar started a tentative, uncomfortable clap that stopped almost immediately. Victor Hale took a sip of his drink. But Sophia hadn't looked at Derek closely enough. She hadn't noticed that he wasn't where she'd last seen him. She hadn't noticed that Michelle had moved to the center of the room. And she hadn't noticed that Raymond was standing near the main speaker system with a tablet in his hand. She found out where Derek was when the murmuring stopped. Because the murmuring stopped because of a sound. It was the sound of a wheelchair's brake being released. And then, slowly, with the deliberate physical precision of someone who has trained for exactly this moment for 4 months, Derek Coltrane placed both hands on the armrests and stood up. He didn't stand perfectly. It wasn't a cinematic launch to his feet. His legs shook slightly. He steadied himself against the side table. And then he stood, straight and full, at 6 feet and 1 inch, in a room that had gone so silent that the jazz quartet's bassist could be heard setting his instrument down behind him. Nobody spoke. 200 people stood completely still. Sophia's face, the performance, the gracious sorrow, all of it, went blank. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment right now that says, "I'm still here." Let's see who's been with Derek through every single step of this story, because what he does in the next 60 seconds is what this entire thing has been building toward. Derek reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He removed a folded document and set it on the table beside him without looking at it. His voice, when he spoke, was exactly as Raymond had always described it. 5 moves ahead, perfectly controlled. He said, "Sophia, I appreciate the honesty." He let that sit for a moment. Then he said, "I'd like to offer some of my own." He nodded to Raymond. Raymond pressed a button on the tablet. The penthouse's wall-mounted screens, the ones Sophia had installed during the renovation, the one she had used for parties before, lit up simultaneously. On each screen was a financial summary. Clean, organized, formatted by Carol Huang with the kind of clinical precision that made it impossible to misread. Account numbers, transfer dates, amounts, a running total at the bottom that stopped at $987,000. The name attached to several of the destination transfers was not obscured. The room read it in silence. Victor Hale set his drink down. Derek said, "The forensic documentation you're looking at was compiled over 3 months by a certified financial investigator and reviewed by my legal team." He did not raise his voice. He did not move from his position beside the table. "My attorney, Sandra Voss, filed the relevant motions with the Cook County Court 2 days ago. The joint accounts have been frozen as of this morning. The Oak Park equity line has been suspended pending review. And the personal account that received the most significant transfers, registered under a holding entity in Victor's name." He looked directly at Victor Hale, who had gone the color of ash, "has been flagged with the appropriate financial institutions." There was a sound. Someone near the back of the room who had exhaled too sharply. No one else moved. Sophia had not moved. She was standing with the microphone still in her hand, slightly lowered, as if she'd forgotten it was there. Derek turned to look at her, and when he did, his voice dropped just slightly. Not in volume, but in tone, the way a temperature drops and you feel it in your chest. He said, "You spent 2 years believing I was finished. I understand why. I would have believed it too." He paused. "You were wrong." Michelle stepped forward from her position in the center of the room. She did this without drama, the way she did everything, quietly, precisely. She said, simply, "My name is Michelle Carter. I'm a licensed neurorehabilitation specialist. Mr. Coltrane has been in intensive recovery work for 17 weeks. What you're seeing tonight is the result of his work." She didn't add anything else. She didn't need to. The room understood what it was looking at. Camille, who was standing near the dessert table with both hands over her mouth, understood something else. She understood that her sister had made a catastrophic miscalculation about who exactly she was dealing with. What happened after that unfolded the way legal and financial consequences usually do. Not dramatically, but completely. Sophia left the penthouse that night with Camille, who drove in silence for 20 minutes before saying, "Sophia, what did you do?" The answer to that question would take months of proceedings to fully document. But the outline of it was this. The transfers Carol Huang had traced constituted both civil fraud and potential criminal wire fraud under Illinois statutes. Sandra Voss was not interested in a settlement that protected Sophia's reputation. She was interested in full restitution and the legal protection of Derek's remaining assets. The divorce proceedings were filed simultaneously with the fraud documentation. Sophia's attorney, she hired one the morning after the party, the first of 3 she would go through in the following 6 months, told her on the first consultation that her position was not strong. This was an understatement. Victor Hale, faced with his own legal exposure through the holding account, did not stand by Sophia. He retained separate counsel and began cooperating with the financial investigators within 2 weeks. Marcus Britton, who had never been anything more to Sophia than a poor decision, simply stopped returning her calls. The Miami hotel receipts, which Sandra Voss subpoenaed as part of the financial discovery, documented enough to eliminate any sympathy argument Sophia might have raised about the state of the marriage. Raymond told Derek, in a quiet dinner at a restaurant in River North 3 months after the party, that the firm had received 2 major listing inquiries in the weeks following the story that had quietly circulated through Chicago's professional community. People respected what they had seen, not the spectacle of it. Derek hadn't been interested in spectacle. They respected the patience. They respected the fact that a man who had every reason to collapse had instead used the time to prepare. Raymond said, "You know what people keep saying? Derek said he didn't. Raymond said, "They keep saying they didn't know you were that kind of man." Derek looked at his glass for a moment. He said, "I didn't used to know either." He said it without bitterness, which is the thing that is hardest to explain to people who weren't there. The accident had taken from Derek things that he would spend years, maybe the rest of his life, working to rebuild. His recovery was real. Michelle's documentation confirmed consistent voluntary motor response returning to his lower limbs, and his prognosis for increased function over the next 18 months was genuinely optimistic. But he was not walking out of restaurants yet. He was not back to the man he had been on West Madison Street before the truck. What he was, though, was clear. Clear in a way that the man before the accident perhaps hadn't been. He had lost the armor and discovered that underneath it was something more useful than armor. He had learned to be still. He had learned to watch. He had learned that patience, applied correctly, is not passive at all. It is the most active thing a person can do. Michelle reduced her formal care hours as Derek's independence increased, which was how it was supposed to work. She didn't leave the picture entirely. She and Derek had developed the kind of working relationship that forms between two people who have been in a room together during the hardest hours of a life. There's an honesty to it that most relationships don't reach. She told him, on one of their last formal therapy sessions, that she'd known within the first week that he had the right wiring for recovery. Not physically, that came later. She meant his psychological architecture. His ability to endure discomfort without catastrophizing. His refusal to make the pain the story. Derek said, "You could have told me that earlier. Would have helped." Michelle said, "No, it wouldn't have. You needed to find it yourself." She was right. She usually was. The legal proceedings took 11 months to fully resolve. The final judgment required Sophia to repay $942,000 in documented transfers, the difference from the full amount reflecting certain shared expenditures that Sandra Voss had agreed to set aside. The criminal wire fraud referral was ultimately not prosecuted. The state's attorney's office determined that a civil judgment served the public interest adequately, and Derek did not push for criminal charges. Sandra Voss had advised him that he could. He declined. He said he wasn't interested in Sophia's punishment. He was interested in his own recovery. The assets were returned. The penthouse, which was in Derek's name alone, a fact Sophia had apparently not fully investigated before she began redecorating it, remained his. He sold it 8 months after the proceedings concluded and moved into a townhouse in Lincoln Park. Single level, fully accessible, with a garden in the back that he hadn't expected to care about and found he did. Coltrane Property Group, under Raymond's steady management during Derek's absence and then Derek's gradual return, had not collapsed. It had contracted. They'd lost 2 agents who weren't sure the firm would survive, and 1 significant listing that went to a competitor. But the core was intact. By the spring following the party, Derek was back in the office 3 days a week. He had a custom desk configuration that Raymond had installed without being asked. They didn't discuss it. That was how they operated. By the following autumn, the firm closed its largest deal in 6 years. A mixed-use development on the near north side that Derek had been quietly structuring for 8 months. The commission alone covered the remaining legal fees and left margin. Raymond brought a bottle of something expensive to the office on the day the wire cleared. They sat in the conference room and drank 2 glasses each. It was enough. There's a detail from the night of the party that didn't make it into the versions of the story that circulated later. It was a small thing, but it's the thing that Derek mentioned years afterward when someone asked him about that night. Just before he stood up, in the seconds when the room was still processing Sophia's announcement and the murmuring was still spreading, he looked across the room and caught Michelle's eye. She wasn't watching Sophia. She was watching him. She gave him a very slight nod. Not encouragement exactly, more like confirmation. Like she was saying, "You already know you can do this." And he did. That's the thing about the real version of this kind of story. The moment the world sees, the standing up, the document on the table, the screens lighting up, that moment is just the surface. What happened underneath it, in the early mornings in the pool, in the sessions where they had to stop because the pain was too much, in the evenings where Derek sat alone with the account statements and chose not to react. That is where the actual story lives. The public moment is just evidence of the private work. Karma, when it finally arrived, didn't arrive loud. It arrived complete. Victor Hale's business reputation in Chicago's hospitality sector did not survive the exposure of the holding account. He relocated to Phoenix the following year and operated at a fraction of his previous scale. Marcus Britton, who had no financial entanglement but had been publicly identified through the Miami hotel documentation in the proceedings, experienced the particular social consequence of being known as the man who had been used as a prop in someone else's betrayal. People in their professional circle were neither sympathetic nor particularly interested. Sophia left Chicago in the spring. She moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, where she had a cousin. Her social media went quiet. Camille, who had kept a careful distance from the proceedings, reached out to Derek once by email about 8 months after the party. The email was brief. It said, "I should have seen it sooner. I'm sorry." Derek replied after 3 days with 2 sentences. "You don't owe me anything, Camille. Take care of yourself." He meant both. And Derek Coltrane, 44 years old the night his wife announced she was done with him, 45 by the time the accounts were returned, 46 when the Lincoln Park townhouse closed, kept working. He didn't do interviews. He didn't tell the story at dinner parties. He went to physical therapy 3 times a week and made steady, non-linear, genuinely hard-won progress. He ran the firm. He talked to Raymond on the phone most mornings. He sat in his garden when the weather allowed and did not spend very much time being angry. He had been angry quietly, precisely in the way he did everything, and the anger had been useful. It had kept him focused during the months when the evidence was being assembled and the strategy was being constructed. But anger as a permanent state is expensive, and Derek Coltrane had always understood the cost of things. He spent what he needed to spend and let the rest go. That was the choice. It always comes back to a choice. Sophia had made hers. Derek had made his. The difference between them, in the end, was not intelligence or resources or even patience. It was what each of them had decided to do with the time they were given. One of them used it to take. The other used it to rebuild. And in accounting that always, eventually, catches up with everyone, the numbers cleared. If the story moved you, if Derek's patience and quiet strength reminded you of your own, or reminded you of someone you love, hit that like button right now. Leave a comment below and tell us what moment in this story hit you hardest. Was it when he stood up? Was it when Michelle nodded? Was it the email to Camille? Tell us. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This channel tells the stories that matter, the real, slow, earned kind. Subscribe, hit the bell, and we'll see you in the next one. Because the next story, you're going to want to be here for it.